with tech all the time.
Oh, avoid legal snags by telling people they're being recorded. Ariel, you're being recorded.
Okay, good to know. It tells me in the top of the screen too, actually.
Right, that aside, morning. I am James Coleman Maservi, fantasy author extraordinaire, creator of creatures, embellisher of events, and Firebrand, stories that kindle imagination, and I made it through without making a mistake. So yay! Anyway, I'm here doing a live recording with my good friend Ariel Paiement on the questions from the JQM literary chat. So I'm going to pull that up. And so Ariel, first thing here that is tell us about yourself.
Okay, that's always a fun question. So I am a Christian speculative fiction author. I mainly write fantasy, but occasionally I do write some sci-fi. My current work in progress is a soft sci-fi novel, or novella, I guess. In terms of things I enjoy doing, I obviously writing. If I didn't enjoy writing, I would not be an author. But I also enjoy editing, so I do some freelance editing on the side when I've got the time, and I love English, especially any opportunity to teach English is a good opportunity for me. But my day job is in accounting-related fields, so kind of two opposite sides of the spectrum there. But so that's a little bit about me and what I do.
So what influences you to write speculative fiction?
I guess it kind of goes back to childhood for me. My house was one that was kind of divided on it a little bit. My dad was always big on speculative fiction. He loved fantasy, loved sci-fi. When he had time to read, if he wasn't reading nonfiction for something specific, he was reading speculative fiction. My mom was not so big on it. She didn't mind the sci-fi, but she did not like the fantasy side at all. Her main objection being magic. She just couldn't stand it. So if she had had her way, we wouldn't have been reading any of that. But, you know, I feel in some ways the Lord intervened there with my dad liking it, because I would not be where I am today if it hadn't been for him. But he reined my mother in, and they figured out, you know, here's what we're going to do. Here's the, you know, guidelines we have for the kids for what they can and can't read, something that we can both be pretty comfortable with. And that was what they did. So my mom was a big influence on me as a writer in general, just because she was the one that took us to the library. She taught me to read. She was the one that really put the effort in when she saw that I liked art and writing, to put the two together and to really encourage me. And then my dad was the one who developed my love for speculative fiction as a writer, because when I started writing, there were all these different authors that he said, you need to read these people if you're going to be a good author. If you want to know what good writing looks like, you know, you need to read these guys. Sanderson was one of those. Orson Scott Card was another. And he said, you know, you can't be a good writer if you don't read good writing. And so he gave me classics, but he also gave me a lot of speculative fiction, because that was what he read. So I really veered towards the genre. I loved it. And for me, one of the things that I noticed growing up was that there was a lot of speculative fiction out there, because it is a big genre, but there wasn't a lot of good Christian speculative fiction. By that I mean there wasn't a lot of either Christian influenced speculative fiction, where it wasn't necessarily focused on God and Christianity, but it still held Christian values and morals. Nor was there a lot of openly Christian speculative fiction, like allegory or stuff set in our world that has a fantasy aspect but is focused on Christianity and God. There wasn't a lot of that was done well. There was a lot of it out there, I guess, available, but I didn't enjoy reading it because it was very preachy. And even though I grew up in a Christian home, I didn't want to read that because I was like, I don't want your doctrinal standpoints crammed down my throat in a very, very obvious way. So that really bothered me. And it was, I think, the second biggest influence on me deciding that I wanted to write fantasy, because I felt I was a Christian first and an author second. And I knew there were a lot of kids out there like me who really loved the genre, but it was hard to find stuff that they felt was appropriate or that was a good influence and really fed their love for Christ while also giving them enjoyment. And I wanted to give that. And so that was a way that I could.
About the only two examples in popular literature of solid fantasy with very impactful and to me very personally influential religious tones were Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings for me. Outside of that, I ran into a lot more like you, right. a lot like that. You know, the worst example of any that I read. Now, this wasn't this was historical fiction, not fantasy at all, but I want to say it was Robinson Crusoe.
Okay. Yep. That's very
the
heavy.
Story. This. Okay. Wonderful. I wonder if the character feels like this, or if the author just is wanting to outdo his preacher.
Right.
That's just kind of how it felt to me. That's the biggest example of anything that I've read of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I've ran into a couple of fantasy that way, but
yeah, I found better stuff now as an adult, and then as a young adult as well. I found some stuff once I was old enough to be reading things with a little bit much more mature themes. I did find some stuff that was great. Karen Hancock's Legends of the Guardian King series, excellent Christian fantasy, at least from my perspective. It's encouraging, but it's also not, it makes you think, and it makes you really evaluate where your faith is at and what you believe. But she's not cramming a particular doctrinal belief down your throat. It's more focused on the relationship between the believer and Christ. And I liked that. But it's difficult to find fantasy that does that. And I wanted to be among the authors who did that. So.
All right. I forgot what the next thing is. Oh! So, okay, there we go. So, anyway, I don't know if this is, because I'm doing this with my phone, I don't know if switching back and forth, this is for anyone watching, I don't know if switching back and forth between my phone and the questions on my phone is messing up the video feed or not. I'll have to watch it later and see, but that's what I'm doing, is I'm reminding myself of the next question. Now, everyone who's been following me for a while knows that my two absolute favorite authors in my world create their own genre, Mark Twain and Charles Dickens. And, I go on and on and on about why they're my favorite authors on my own time. And that brings up, Ariel, who are your favorite authors and why?
Okay, anyone who has been following me for a while will know that Brandon Sanderson is the top of the list. He's just a phenomenal author all the way around. He deserves to be one of the best known fantasy authors, and he is one of the best known contemporary fantasy authors. If you go Google who the best known are for 2020, he's on that list of, I think, 40. But he deserves his place on that list. He is one of the best writers when it comes to weaving world building into his writing. Anyone who wants to learn how to do world building right needs to read his Stormlight Archives. Really anything of his, but especially that series, is just, I think, a culmination of everything he's learned over his career and brought to his writing. that one's definitely my favorite series for that and the characterization. And honestly, I haven't found an area of his writing that he doesn't do well. Over time, he's definitely improved on some things. His debut novels are not as strong, I feel, in the world building aspect and even in some of the character aspects as his later novels. But they're still excellent pieces to read. And in fact, his debut novels were some of the ones that were given to me as a young writer that my dad said, you need to read these, or you can't consider yourself well educated in what good writing looks like. There's a reason for that. It's because he's really, really good at what he does. So he definitely makes the top of the list. Orson Scott Card would probably be a close second, but he's in the sci-fi genre, so a little bit different. Ender's Game was, again, one of those books that was on the list for things that I needed to read to consider myself well-rounded as an author. And it was phenomenal, honestly. Like, definitely a completely different feel to it than anything from Sanderson, with the exception of his most recent novel. But still, really good grasp of character, of story. Not as much on the world building, but still there enough that it wasn't super noticeable that he didn't do any work or something. He definitely did craft his fiction well. So those two make my top two authors. Besides that, I do really enjoy Cinda Williams Chima. She's not as good as the other two, I wouldn't say, but still really enjoyable. And I think there's a lot that people can learn from reading her stuff. And I just like reading it. I mean, she's got memorable characters.
On Sanderson's point, I have not read Stormlight Archive yet. I haven't started Stormlight Archive. I have read a handful of other things from him. My absolute favorite from him is The Final Empire, the first book of the Mistborn. Yep. I don't consider the entire Mistborn series as one of my absolute favorite fantasy series, but I do consider The Final Empire as one of my absolute favorite books. I loved it. I loved, from Sanderson, I loved Legion, and then I can't talk about Sanderson and think about Sanderson and all of the improvements in his writing style without mentioning how well he did creating, continuing, and perfecting Robert Jordan's voice on the last three books of Wheel of Time.
Yeah, that's what he's most known.
For everyone who's followed my blog knows that I am not a fan of the Wheel of Time series at all. I did not. There was a lot of things about that I didn't like, but I thought when Jordan took over the series, he did a fantastic job of keeping Jordan's voice. And I have noticed from his writings of before working with Jordan or working with Jordan's notes and after finishing the Wheel of Time, how much just the principles of world building and character development and understanding of everything that's going on has influenced and affected his writing style.
I think you see that in the Stormlight Archive specifically as well, because I think the first one he had already written by the time he took over for Jordan, but before the second one was out, he had taken over for Jordan, and you can really see how that complex set of plot lines that he set up in the first one starts to come together, and he does that so well. He's got like 3 different plot lines, I think, that are going on, 2 main ones and a minor one on the side. And he just pulls them together so well, makes it work with the world and everything, and the world building itself just becomes that much richer in the second book. But it doesn't take away from the reading experience at all. And I don't know that growth would have happened without taking over for Jordan on the Wheel of Time series.
And then on Scott Card, I really enjoyed Ender. I did not necessarily enjoy the rest of the Ender game series. I loved Ender Shadow. I'm
Yes.
not necessarily big into the. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the Great Game and all of the stuff that he had going on in the Shadow series. So I wasn't as into the Shadow series as I was into Ender's Shadow, which I loved that more than Ender. I thought that was fantastic. But my
Yes.
favorite stuff from Card, absolute favorite stuff from Card, are Worms. I don't know if you're familiar with Worms.
Heard of it, haven't read.
Second book he came out with, and the immediate response to Worms was, it's a good book, but it has nothing to do with Ender. And
has to.
I'm like, my criminies, this book is phenomenal. I loved it. I loved everything about Worms. I thought it was fantastic the way that Card did that. But my favorite, my absolute, there are a handful of stuff from Card that I was not a big fan of. The Homecoming series I did not necessarily love all that much. The Women of Genesis series that he did for Deseret Book and Shadow Mountain, I thought was interesting, well written, but wasn't my favorite.
Right.
But my favorite from him was Enchantment.
Okay.
Modern day adaptation of Russian fairy tales.
Yep.
I thought that was phenomenal. I spent some time living in Russia, and I just have a great love for Russian people, the Russian culture. And when I saw that Card had done that, I'm like, yeah, I got to read that book.
It's
and
unique.
I loved it.
You don't see a lot of that out there. So.
No, I thought that was fantastic. And then I also know Chima Williams. I first ran into hers right after the first book came out in the Air Chronicles, Warrior Air.
Yep.
That I jumped on board on the Air Chronicles ever since Warrior Air came out, and following the series ever since.
So I own like everything she's put out so far. So I do really enjoy her stuff.
Yeah, I thought that was a lot of fun. But
definitely.
Anything you want to add on before we move on to the next?
Don't think so.
All right, so I'm jumping screens again. Oh. So I'm waiting for the screen to come back. All right, so I got the screen back up. So what are your favorite books?
Favorite books? You should know better than to ask an author that.
I've been doing this with authors long enough. You asked me my favorite books, and I got it narrowed down to 5.
I have such a hard time.
With a whole lot of footnotes that can make it a lot longer.
Yeah, for sure. I have a hard time with it because I do read a lot, so I'm always running across things, and I'm like, oh, I like this. Oh, I like that. So, yeah, I have a hard time. But I definitely would say Tolkien is on that list with, I would say I liked the first and second books best from Lord of the Rings. I'll show how much of a nerd I am. The Silmarillion was a favorite, along with some of the other historical type books he wrote. I just loved reading those. I know most people were like, history books, why? I just found it really interesting. I don't know.
I had a lot of fun with Silmarillion when I finally did it, but I did it with when I did it, it was the audio book read by Sauron.
Nice.
Yeah, the audio book for Silmarillion is read by Christopher Lee, and I'm like, this is weird, guys.
I bet. I just read the book straight up, so you know.
Yeah.
But so yeah, Tolkien stuff. With Sanderson, he's got to be on that list. He just has to. I really enjoyed. I don't know if I can pick a favorite out of the series, but I really did enjoy his Stormlight Archives. I don't think he's done with it yet either. He's got 3 gigantic books, but he's not done with it. So I am waiting.
No, the series is continuing.
I want the next book, but currently that's not out, so I will have to wait. But yeah, I really enjoy that series, and I haven't finished it yet, but Arcanum Unbound by him is quite interesting. It's a collection of short stories that he wrote that go in different universes, but it's intriguing because that's where you really start to understand just how brilliant of a world builder Sanderson is, because he has footnotes in there that talk about the story and how it connects with other things. Not all of them talk about how it connects, but many of them do talk about the connections. And you start to realize that a lot of these universes, like Mistborn and others, where you thought they were totally unconnected to things like the Stormlight Archives, they're not. They're totally connected. You just have to be paying very close attention to different things. So I found that to be really intriguing, and as somebody who loves world building, that was a great exposure for me to see how you can do that, because I do that on a smaller scale with my own work. Everything connects. I have more of an obvious connector point than he does, but they all do connect. And so seeing how somebody else who's a master at that does it was just super interesting. Besides that, I don't know. I do enjoy some stuff from Terry Pratchett. I don't know exactly if I could narrow it down. I can't remember what his is called. He had one that I really enjoyed. What? It's not Discworld.
Part of the Discworld?
Well, it may be on the Discworld, but it's not. It was a standalone. It might be called the Light Brigade or something like that. I don't know. But it was basically about this group of this one girl who joins the military when girls aren't allowed because all of their men have died in this pointless war, and they don't even know what they're fighting about anymore. But the whole entire book is basically comedy, true to Pratchett. It's satire and comedy, and I just loved it. So I guess like those are the ones I can think of right now that are top of the list, but it changes. The only thing that doesn't usually is Sanderson and Tolkien.
Yeah, on mine, my favorite book is really the book that got me into reading, and that was A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens.
Yep.
I got introduced to A Christmas Carol as a senior in high school, mandatory reading for college, or mandatory reading for a college course in high school, and we had read quite a few different books before then. Quite a few different literature books before then, but we hit Christmas Carol and just, I don't know, something about it. And it's been my favorite book ever since then. And Dickens has been my favorite author ever since.
I can agree with that.
Other, for me, favorite books are, my top 5 are Christmas Carol, A Bleak House by Dickens, Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings volume by Tolkien, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and The Stand by King. my favorite thing coming out of On Writing from Stephen King is when he says that people still send him photographs or send him letters and postcards asking about the characters' lives at the end of The Stand, how their life was back in Maine, and how particular individuals went, and his response has always been, I don't know, the book ended and they stopped talking to me. I'm like, that's awesome.
That's so funny.
That's awesome. I love that. So obviously I'm also strong into speculative fiction, as you can tell. But anyway, now we move on to a part that is near and dear to my heart. Excluding my own characters that are unfamiliar with this, with which you don't pay very close attention to me at all, if you don't know this, but 2 of my absolute favorite literary characters come out of Les Miserables, Eponine Thénardier and the Bishop from the start of the book, and they are both, for various reasons, absolute favorites of mine. Another absolute favorite of mine comes from a fellow indie author, K.R. Martin's Sovereign of the Seas. Her main character, Renee, from that series, I absolutely love and adore her. But enough about me, Ariel. Who are your favorite literary characters?
We're going to go back to Sanderson again for my top favorite literary character, at least for now. I like Kaladin Stormblessed from his Stormlight archives. That character had such a huge arc, at least has had such a huge arc so far, but I won't spoil the books, but I just love the character. He's your quintessential, broody, I have a miserable life kind of guy with just enough combat skill and danger to make him interesting. But no, I appreciate his sense of humor. Maybe not everyone will, but I appreciate the sense of humor. I like seeing how he interacts with all of the other characters too. I think my favorite interaction with him and other characters was with Shallan, one of the main female leads, where they meet for the first time, and I can't remember exactly all the circumstances, but she, for some reason, was pretending to be a princess from a tribe up in the mountains that didn't speak good, fluent English. I don't know that his characters speak English, but at least reading it, she didn't speak their dialect very well. And I think she was just pretending because she wanted help from him or something and figured if she pretended to be a princess, she'd have better treatment. She didn't know Kaladin in assuming that, because that's not at all the case. But their first interaction, she told him basically that he had offended her, and in order to make the offense right, he had to give her his boots. She came up with this because she was walking on very bad terrain in basically their version of slippers. So they had a very interesting conversation where he finally was just like, no, you can't have my boots the entire time. And I can't remember who won out, but the two of them are both very stubborn. So it was really funny to see them interacting. All-time favorite has got to be Wit from the same series. That guy is hilarious. Everybody hates him. For those who don't know the series, Wit is basically just a title for the King's Wit. Nobody knows for sure what his name is through the book, though I think he does go by a couple of different titles. No one ever knows for sure what his name really is or where he came from. Though Sanderson does drop some hints. Not going to spoil, find them yourself, but he does drop some hints as to how this character connects with other things and where he came from. But he's so funny. He insults everyone. That is literally his job as the King's Wit, to insult everyone else around him. So there is not a person that he doesn't poke fun at. And even the most educated but gentle-hearted of the court gets made fun of at some point. He's kinder to those who don't deserve it, but nobody gets spared. And I love that. But he's also really great about giving advice. So when he first met Kaladin, he gave him some great advice, more kind of in a riddle format that left Kaladin wondering, why do you even bother talking? Because none of that made sense. But as he went through different situations, the advice did make sense later. So Wit is one of those people who gives advice that seems very cryptic at the time, but when it's the right time, suddenly it dawns on you what he was talking about. And he's a great storyteller. So some of the most interesting stories that take place in Sanderson's series with these characters, Wit tells them. So I just love the character. He has so many different facets to him. He's definitely not boring. And if you like sarcasm and burning people really, really bad, he's your kind of guy. So those are my top two favorites right now.
Fun. Is there anything else that you would like to share with your readers before I stop recording this?
I am pretty open to connecting, so if you guys want to talk to me, comment, shoot me a message, whatever, I prefer no creepy ones, though. I get weird ones. So please introduce yourself and don't just say, hi, how are you? I will delete the request. Sorry, guys. But especially if I look on the profile and see it's a guy. No offense to any guys out there, but that's just weird. So if you have a legitimate reason to connect with me, like, yeah, I'm pretty friendly, pretty open. Just make sure that your initial message to me is one that does not sound stalkerish or creepy, because I will delete it without commenting or replying. Or if I do reply, I will be passive aggressive and tell you to go away and not to do this again to other people. So yeah, I've done that with a few people who seemed to just not realize how disturbing their stuff was. But generally I just delete it. So don't be that person. But otherwise, please do connect with me, talk to me. I write for you guys. So if you're not connecting, it makes me sad. But
it was fairly easy for me to connect with Ariel because we got introduced from a mutual friend during a Facebook event.
Yep.
So that I was in charge of, that I do a lot of. So that made it easy. So I didn't end up being one of the weird ones. I ended up actually becoming one of her friends, and it's awesome. Fantastic writer. Unfortunately, I've only read 2 of her stories. Bane of Ashkaroth.
Ashkrith, but close.
Askrith.
Yep.
Which I'm just telling you guys, fantasy book based in archaeology, you don't get much more heaven than that. At least not for me. And I've been a big fan of that. And the other book I read is anthology, that part of an anthology that we have. That we have together that will be coming out before too long from the point that this is made, and fantastic. So I'll have Ariel shoot me over some of her where to find her on social media, some of those links, and you can find her books, check them out. Fantastic author, good friend, and really glad that we were able to make this happen.
Yep.
Any parting thoughts, Ariel?
Nope. Just I'm easy to find. I have pages on most of the social media sites. It's easy to connect with me. Everything's pretty much public. So don't hesitate to do so.
All right. Thank you for doing this with me. And anyway, everyone paying attention, thanks for joining me on this. And if you are an author that would like to be interviewed on my page, just reach out to me, and just tell me who you are, that you'd like to be interviewed, either a video or blog post, and I'll get back with you. Thank you all, and have a good night.